Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of A Comprehensive History of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Today we're looking at 2004, the year where things got really crazy. At the end of our previous episode, we saw 2003 close off with the release of Dark Crisis. As such, 2004 would begin with adjustments to the limited list. Vampire Lord, Reflect Bounder, and Butterfly Dagger Elmer from Dark Crisis would be joining the list at limited. Meanwhile, in semi-limited, we would see Morphin Jar go from 1 to 2. As we can see at this point, the limited list is just overloaded. There are 48 cards in total that are limited to 1. This overabundance of game changers and power cards just wasn't healthy or sustainable. Eventually, something was gonna give. And give it would. March 1st, 2004. That was the day Yu-Gi-Oh! Changed forever. The invasion of chaos had arrived. It is no exaggeration to say the set was massive for its time. There are so many strong cards in this set that I can't possibly begin to list them all here. So here's some samples of how this set outdid everything that came before it. Dark Magician of Chaos had the effect where, when it's summoned, add 1 spell card from your graveyard to your hand. Any monster this card destroys by battle is removed from play, and when this card leaves the field, remove it from play. That might seem kind of tame, but once you see this card in action, you will realize it's one of the most broken, degenerate cards ever printed. Chaos Sorcerer. This card can only be special summoned by banishing 1 light and 1 dark monster from your graveyard. Once per turn, you can remove 1 face-up monster on the field from play. This card cannot attack the turn you use this effect. Blackluster Soldier. Envoy of the Beginning. This card can only be special summoned by removing 1 light and 1 dark monster in your graveyard from play. Once during each of your turns, you can apply one of the following effects. Remove 1 monster on the field from play. This card cannot attack the turn you use this effect. If this card destroyed your opponent's monster by battle and sent it to the graveyard, it can attack again once in a row. If Chaos Sorcerer sounds garbage in comparison to this, then you're right, it was. BLS Envoy was so powerful that you didn't even need to play Chaos Sorcerer. Not only was its banishing effect better than Chaos Sorcerer's because it could target face-down monsters, but BLS was also a game ender thanks to its ability to attack twice. This is without question the most powerful monster in the game so far. And yet, we can still go one better. Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. This card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card can only be special summoned by removing from play 1 light and 1 dark monster in your graveyard. By paying 1000 life points, send all cards in both players' hands and fields to the graveyard. Inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent's life points for each card that is sent to the graveyard by this effect. Holy hot damn. This is the most busted Yu-Gi-Oh! Card effect ever. It doesn't just nuke the field, but it nukes the hands as well? How do you even top the power level of this card? If there was a tier list for monster cards based on their individual power in a vacuum, this would be in God tier. There is simply no other monster in the game who can match this destructive power. What an absolute beast of a card. So as we can see, Invasion of Chaos was an absolute revelation for the game, and players couldn't wait to get their hands on these new cards. Manticore of Darkness is one of those cards they should have read again before releasing. During the end phase of the turn this card is sent to the graveyard, send 1 Beast, Beast Warrior, or Wing Beast type monster card from your hand or side of the field to the graveyard to special summon this card from the graveyard. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, what if you play 2 of them? You've just created a loop, as you send 1 Manticore to the graveyard to special summon a Manticore from the graveyard. You then send that Manticore to the graveyard to special summon the other Manticore from the graveyard, and you just keep going and going and going. It is an infinite loop. Manju of the 10,000 Hands. When this card is normal summoned or flip summoned, you can select 1 ritual monster card or 1 ritual spell card from your deck and add it to your hand. This love child of Senju and Sonic Bird would be a staple in ritual decks for years to come. Stealthbird functioned just like the Desert Locust from Pharaonic Guardian, but instead of eating your opponent's cards, it was eating their life points, 1,000 at a time. You best believe there were stall decks built around this little birdie. Gren Marju da Isa. The attack and defense of this card become the number of your cards that are removed from play times 400 points. This card was terrible. And then Pot of the Sires happened. Strike Ninja was a retrain of a really bad level 5 vanilla monster from starter deck Yugi. This level 4 warrior had the effect where you could banish it from the field on either player's turn by removing 2 dark monsters in your graveyard from play. Going temporarily negative in card advantage doesn't seem like a very good effect, but trust me, this card had some combos. Berserk Gorilla was a 2000 attack level 4 beast monster, and its only downside was it had to always attack if able, and if this card is in face-up defense position, destroy it. Of all the low-level monsters who traded a high attack for a negative drawback, Berserk Gorilla was easily the best yet. If this card hit the field, your opponent had to get rid of it. Dimension Fusion and Self-Destruct Button. These are 2 cards that should have never gotten past playtesting. In the case of Dimension Fusion, pay 2,000 life points. Both players special summon as many of their removed from play monsters as possible. Remember Dark Magician of Chaos? Remember Strike Ninja? Remember all those cards you removed from play for Blackluster Soldier? Once you've filled up your banish pile with monsters, you can just drop this and fill the field in one swoop. This card was absolutely mental, and you will lose your minds when you see some of the stuff that can be done with it. Self-Destruct Button. You can only activate this card when your life points are lower than your opponent's life points and the difference is 7,000 points or more. Both players' life points become 0. It's just stupid. It's just a stupid card. Why would you allow players to reset games because they're losing? If Invasion of Chaos was the only thing that had released on March 1st, we could have called it IOC Day. But it wasn't. There was something else also released that day. Starter Deck Evolution, Yugi and Kaiba. Quite frankly, these decks were not very good. Forgive me for a moment if I can't help but point out the hilarity of releasing both versions of Blackluster Soldier on the same day. That all said, these decks did introduce a surprisingly good card into the game. Last Will was a spell card whose effect could only be used once per turn. When a monster on your side of the field is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one monster with 1,500 attack points or less from your deck. At face value, this card might seem to be lacking in utility. Normally, such recruitment effects were designed to take advantage of your opponent destroying your monsters by battle. Instead, Last Will was asking you to send monsters on your turn. So what, were you just going to ram your monsters into your opponent and then summon something? Nah, the card was way better than that. Tribute summoning, tributing for effects, fusion summons, anything you want, last turn will be triggered by it. And as we'll soon come to find, there's some pretty big upsides that come with being able to summon any low attack monster from your deck. March 23rd would see the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dawn of Destiny for the original Xbox, and with it came Widespread Ruin. You can only activate this card when your opponent declares an attack. Destroy one monster with the highest attack among your opponent's attack position monsters. Considering how popular Sakuretsu Armor had become among players, the option to have what was essentially a 4th copy in your deck wasn't too bad. So here we are, the April 2004 limited list. This game has taken all it can stand and it can't stand no more. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been completely broken, and yet, despite the absurd power levels seen in Invasion of Chaos, only 3 cards joined the list. Manticore of Darkness went to semi-limited, while Chaos Emperor Dragon and Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning went to limited. New set releases would begin to slow down from this point on, as the TCG had closed the gap with its Japanese counterpart. Released June 1st, 2004, Ancient Sanctuary would mark the end of the Duel Monsters era. Up until now, all TCG set releases had been compilations of packs from the OCG, combining 2 sets of cards into one. After this, packs would follow the same structure as the OCG, making Ancient Sanctuary the last core set to contain secret rares for the next couple of years. Ancient Sanctuary itself would be quite tame, especially when compared to Invasion of Chaos. That said, it still contained some decent cards. It introduced the Monarch and Agent archetypes, as well as strong utility cards such as Monster Gate, Enemy Controller, Wall of Revealing Light, and Night Assailant. The following month would see the 2004 World Championships be held in Los Angeles. Compared to 2003, it was a much milder affair as Madison Square Garden was swapped for a more conventional venue. Unchanged from 2003, however, was the choice to cater to both the TCG and the video games. Much like last year, we would see the crowning of 2 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Champions. A cool thing about this coverage in particular was the interviews with attendees, not the tournament players, but just common people.
A lot of the parents say that when we go to tournaments, they like their kids playing because it not only develops their intelligence, but also the math with using a computer. And even the 5 and 6-year-olds that can't read, the parents will read for them, and the kids will memorize and then use it when they play.
Great game. Fun. The cards are cool, really cool looking. And there are a lot of people who play it nationwide, so when I come to the World Championship, I get to play people who maybe I could never play again. And that gives you a good feeling.
This kid here knows what's up. We'd all be wise to take his advice on board. So that was the 2004 World Championship, and these are the deck lists. In first place we have Togawa Masatoshi, hailing from Japan. Chaos was the deck to beat in 2004. Masatoshi's deck focused on taking all the best cards available at the time and using them to fuel the summons of Blackluster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon. You may have also noticed that certain power cards are absent from this deck. That's because the 2004 World Championship merged the limited list of the TCG and the new forbidden list of the OCG. Yep, in Japan it had finally happened. They were banning cards from sanctioned play. The likes of Delinquent Duo, Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, Painful Choice, and Yatagarasu would not be making an appearance at this tournament. With many of the game's strongest power cards banned, we saw players going hard on what was available. DD Warrior Lady and Mystical Space Typhoon were absolute must-haves, as many players opted to run multiples of each. For Masatoshi's build, he opted to run double Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. Why Kaiku? Anyone who entered that tournament with ambitions of winning were probably running the Chaos cards. That made Kaiku the perfect counter, as it prevented your opponent from removing cards from play. The side deck itself is pretty standard, but Book of Moon is there once again showing its incredible utility as a card. 3 copies ran in the side. 2004's runner-up would be Hong Kong representative Chan Wan Hang, who was also running Chaos. Even so, this Chaos deck would be less focused than Masatoshi's, running Earth monsters such as Berserk Gorilla and Exiled Force. The deck ran 41 cards, but that didn't matter much for drawing as Reinforcement of the Army was basically a freebie. When comparing the 2004 decks to the previous year, deck building standards hadn't really changed much. Optimal deck building was still just pretty much a mixture of generic strong cards. It's not like today where some decks live and die off their card synergy. Finally, just to get the elephant out of the room, yes, that is a Dark Magician Girl in the side deck. It was a very valuable and expensive card back then. He probably took it for luck. Surikane Yoshinobu would be the recipient of that year's bronze medal as he entered with a very different kind of Chaos deck. Apprentice Magician from Magician's Force would be used to search Magician of Faith on the deck. Try saying that fast. Kuribo in the main seems like an absolute bonkers choice, but in all fairness it protected from Air Knight Parshaf, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, Spirit Reaper, and Don Salug. Your opponent couldn't use their effects if they didn't inflict damage. Even more shocking than the Kuribo, however, is the lack of hand destruction cards in the main. no confiscation or forceful sentry. This deck went all in on field control. It didn't care what cards the opponent had in their hand. Even the side deck was focused mainly on field control. As we can see in the photo, this is indeed the third place prize from the 2004 World Championship. The main prizes that year were gold, silver and bronze replicas of the tablet from the anime. Before we move on from the World Championship, I just want to give a shout out to 4th place British representative Ryan Pugh. When I saw this deck, I couldn't believe it had gotten so far. This isn't a dig at Pugh either. From the list, we can clearly see that he was at a card selection disadvantage compared to his competitors. The deck overall feels like a mismatch of the 2003 and 2004 World Championship deck lists. Out of the decks to make the top cut, it stands out like a sore thumb, and I respect its achievement of 4th place. Finally, shout outs to the Canadian player who showed up with a 60 card fusion deck. Another year, another World Championship out the way, another pack, another broken card to play with. Return from the Different Dimension was more or less a trap version of Dimension Fusion. By paying half their life points, players could special summon as many of their own removed from play monsters as possible. During the end phase, all of those monsters are once again removed from play. While it may have lacked the immediate utility of Dimension Fusion, Return was in some respects the better card. It may not have had the combo potential, but it could be splashed in almost any deck that was utilising a chaos strategy. The card would bring about the creation of the Return deck. Builds focused on reviving as many of their remove from play cards as possible to push for gain. Finally, unlike Dimension Fusion, it didn't revive your opponent's monsters. With such easy utility, Return from the Different Dimension would see play for years to come. Also featuring an exclusive pack was Inferno Tempest. When you take 3000 or more battle damage from one attack, you can activate this card. Remove all monsters in each player's decks and graveyards from play. This card did not see the widespread use that Return did, but it was a cool play to pull off thanks to its devastating effect. Return from the Different Dimension would just be another piece to add to the pile of brokenness that was Yu-Gi-Oh! The game was totally out of control. Not only did you have Chaos Yatterlock, but you had degenerate combo decks, turbo decks, one-turn kill decks, and FTKs such as Magical Scientist and Last Turn. The Magical Scientist FTK burned your opponent to death by summoning fusion monsters that were then tributed with Catapult Turtle. For the Last Turn OTK, you brought out Jogan the Spiritualist and then flipped Last Turn on your opponent's main phase to automatically win the duel. These decks alongside a handful of others showed that Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game had been completely broken. The game was in a very unhealthy state and something had to be done. August 25th, 2004. Remember the day, for it is when Konami finally put their foot down. Yatagarasu, Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, Chaos Emperor Dragon, Mirror Force, Imperial Order, Dark Hole, Raigeki, United We Stand, Monster Reborn, Graceful Charity, Harpy's Feather Duster, and Delinquent Duo would all be banned, forbidding players from using them in competitive play. The list would be controversial to say the least. While the bans for the likes of Yatagarasu, Chaos Emperor Dragon and Imperial Order were warranted, some players were outraged when the likes of Mirror Force also joined them. Konami decided Mirror Force and United We Stand were the problem cards when the likes of Fiber Jar, Painful Choice, and Magical Scientist existed. The list had slapped down Chaos decks and put an end to the Yatterlock, but the likes of the Magical Scientist FTK and Last Turn OTK were still out there. Regardless, it was a time of change for the game, not only in how cards were regulated, but also in how cards were released. Soul of the Duelist would debut on October 1st, 2004. It would be the first booster pack of the GX series. The pack would bring many changes to how boosters were handled for the next couple of years. A lot can be said about the differences between secret rares and ultimate rares, but ultimately it comes down to preference. They're both very nice rarities. Soul of the Duelist was the smallest expansion to the game to date, containing only 60 cards. This is because TCG packs were no longer compilations of OCG sets. The cards they got on the OCG would be the cards we would be getting as well. Compared to the previous handful of sets, Soul of the Duelist was very underpowered. Meta highlights in this pack would be the likes of Hammershot, Mobius the Frost Monarch, and Mind Crush. That same month would see a minor tweak to the Forbidden and Limited list. Morphing Jar, Protector of the Sanctuary, Mystical Space Typhoon, Torrential Tribute, and Dark Magician of Chaos would all go to 1. If you thought the cards on this list were bad enough already, let me tell you ain't seen nothing yet. October would also see the release of Dark Beginning 1, a compilation set containing cards from Legend of Blue Eyes, Metal Raiders, Magic Ruler, Pharaoh's Servant, and Labyrinth of Nightmare. Also included in Dark Beginning was the brand new card, Makuya the Destructor. During the turn this card is sent to the graveyard, the owner of this card can activate trap cards from their hand. There are two types of people: those who don't see the problem with this card's effect, and those who realise just how destructively game-breaking it is. Trap cards don't have immediate activation for a reason. By design, trap cards are slow to compensate for their often powerful effects. Take away that restriction and you get a game state more degenerate than anything that has come before or since. You'd think that would be October wrapped up, but we're not done yet. We still have one more card to talk about. Coming out on October 26 was Yu-Gi-Oh! Destiny Board Traveler for the Game Boy Advance, possibly the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Game ever made. But it did include one important card, DD Assailant. DD Assailant is a level 4 Earth Warrior monster with 1700 attack and 1600 defense with the effect that, when it is destroyed in battle by an opponent's monster, remove both cards from play. DD Assailant wasn't quite as good as Warrior Lady, but it would still see its fair share of play. Carrying on with the video game theme was the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! Capsule Monster Coliseum for the PlayStation 2 on November 26, 2004. CMC was a turn-based strategy game where you moved units across a board not unlike Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics, and chess. Jokes aside, this game also contained a decently strong card in the form of Abyss Soldier. Discard one water monster from your hand to the graveyard, return one card on the field to the opponent's hand. You can only use this effect once per turn during your main phase. For an 1800 attack beat stick, this was a decent effect and it had obvious synergy with Sinister Serpent. Topping off 2004 would be the release of Rise of Destiny. It was the first set to have a sneak preview and the last main set to feature Yugi on the cover. The pack would be the final release before the first ever Shonen Jump Championship tournament, and it is probably best remembered for expanding the Monarch and Harpy families. Cards of note in this set were Machine Duplication, Fusula Dragon, Festeros the Firestorm Monarch, and Dekochi, the Battle Charge Locomotive. Machine Duplication allowed you to target a machine monster with 500 or less attack, and summon 2 more copies of that card from your deck. Unsurprisingly, the ability to special summon 2 monsters from your deck turned out to be very powerful, and the card still sees play today. Fusula Dragon was a level 7 monster who could be normal summoned, but his attack and defense was halved. That might not seem very good, but its level made it an amazing metamorphosis target. When tribute summoned, Festeros the Firestorm Monarch would randomly discard 1 card from your opponent's hand. Then, if that card was a monster, you burnt your opponent for 200 damage times the monster's level. The Kochi was a flip effect monster who let you draw an additional card from your deck. That might seem tame, but its attribute made it perfect fuel for Chaos decks. December 4th, 2004 would see the debut of the Shonen Jump Championship, a precursor to what we now know as the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series. The Shonen Jump Championships were a series of sanctioned events by Konami that took place all over the United States. The regular occurrence of these events made it the closest thing players had to a national circuit. Players from across America would swarm to these events and go head to head to prove who was the best. John Umani would be the first Shonen Jump champion, placing first at GenCon. SJC event winners would receive a copy of Cyberstein as a prize. Cyberstein was an incredibly powerful effect monster who allowed you to pay 5,000 life points to special summon any one fusion monster from your fusion deck. The card's power alongside its scarcity as a prize card made it incredibly valuable. So that's it for 2004. Normally this is where I'd show some duel replays, but quite frankly, me and my friend absolutely hated playing the Chaos format. So instead, here's a compilation of degenerate and broken combo decks. Enjoy!